In the depths of the silence that separates worlds, there lies a radiant path that only the bravest seekers dare to tread. This is the illuminated path, a journey through the mysterious and fascinating astral plane, where the secrets of the soul are revealed like stars in an infinite sky. In this work, Mabel Collins guides us with words that feel like whispers from other realms, illuminating each step with the ancient wisdom of those who have explored the unseen. Here, the laws of time and space dissolve, giving way to a universe where the impossible becomes possible, and the mind awakens to a reality beyond imagination. Prepare to embark on a journey of no return, where the barriers between the physical and the ethereal fade away. Through its pages, you will uncover the mysteries of the soul, the secrets of the energy that connects all beings, and the transformative power of illumination. Let yourself be drawn into this unique experience, where every word is a portal, and every idea a key to unlocking the doors of the unknown. Welcome to the illuminated path, a passage into the astral plane that will transform your vision of the universe and of yourself. Before the eyes can see, they must be incapable of tears. All readers of A Light on the Path must keep in mind that this is a book that may seem to have a touch of philosophy, but little meaning to those who believe it is written in plain English. For many who read it in this way, it will not seem as refined as strong olives in their brine. Be warned and read it accordingly. There is another way to read it, which is the only one that works for many authors. This is not about reading between the lines, but within the words. It is, in fact, about deciphering a profound message. All alchemical works are written in the code I speak of. This code has been used by the great philosophers and poets of all times. It is systematically employed by followers of life and knowledge, who, while appearing to reveal their deepest wisdom, hide their true mystery within the words that express it. They cannot do otherwise. There is a law of nature that insists that human beings must decipher these mysteries for themselves. There is no other way to reach them. An individual who wishes to live must nourish themselves. This is the simple law of nature, which also applies to the higher life. Whoever wants to live and act within it cannot be spoon-fed like a baby. They must nurture themselves. My purpose is to translate some parts of A Light on the Path into a new and at times simpler language. However, I cannot guarantee that my effort will truly serve as an interpretation. For a deaf-mute person, truth does not become more comprehensible if some misguided linguist translates the words into all the living or dead languages and shouts various phrases into their ear. But for those who are not deaf-mute, one language is often more accessible than another, and it is to them that I speak. The first aphorisms of Light on the Path, included in the first section, have remained, as I know well, veiled in their inner meaning to many who have nonetheless pursued the purpose of the book. There are 4 truths proven and certain regarding entry into occultism. The golden gates close that threshold. However, some cross those gates and discover the sublime and boundless that lies beyond, in the distant spaces of time. All will eventually cross those gates, but I am among those who wish that time, the great deceiver, were not so dominant. To those who know and love it, I have nothing to say. But to others, and there are more than some might think, for whom the passage of time is like the strike of a hammer and the sense of space like the bars of an iron cage, I will translate and retranslate until they fully understand. The 4 truths found on the first page of A Light on the Path refer to the trial of initiation that the aspirant to occultism must overcome. Until this trial is passed, they cannot even approach the door leading to knowledge. Knowledge is the greatest inheritance of humanity. Why then should we not strive to obtain it by all possible means? The laboratory is not the only place for experimentation. Let us remember that the word science comes from the Latin scientia, a present participle of scire, meaning to know. Therefore, science is not limited only to matter, nor even to its more subtle and mysterious forms. The idea that science deals only with matter is merely a product of the idle spirit of the times. Science is a word that encompasses all forms of knowledge. It is fascinating what chemists discover and how they penetrate the depths of matter to its subtlest forms. But there are other types of knowledge besides this, and not all restrict their scientific quest for knowledge to experiments that can be verified by physical senses. Anyone who is not dull or dominated by a predominant vice has intuited, or perhaps even discovered with some certainty, that subtleties exist within the physical senses. This is nothing extraordinary. If we were to examine nature closely, we would discover that everything visible to the naked eye holds something even more important hidden within. The microscope has opened up a world for us, yet within the envelopes the microscope reveals lies the mystery that no machine can probe. The entire world is filled with life and light, even in its most material forms, thanks to an inner world. Some call this inner world astral, and while the word simply means starry, it is an apt description, as stars, as Locke noted, are luminous bodies that emit light of their own. This quality is characteristic of the life residing in matter. Those who perceive it do not need an external light source to see it. Moreover, the word star derives from the Anglo-Saxon sturen, meaning to guide or move, and undoubtedly it is the inner life that guides the outer life, just as a person's brain directs the movements of their lips. Thus, while astral may not be the most appropriate word, I use it for my present purpose. The entire work of the Light on the Path is written in astral code and can only be deciphered by those who have the capacity to read on the astral plane. Its teaching focuses primarily on the cultivation and development of astral life. Until the first step in this development is taken, rapid knowledge known as clear intuition is unattainable for humans. This positive and certain intuition is the only form of knowledge that allows one to advance quickly or reach their true and elevated state within the limits of their conscious effort. Obtaining knowledge through experimentation is a method too tedious for those who aspire to accomplish true work. Those who gain it through clear intuition appropriate its various forms with extreme rapidity through a determined act of will, much like a dedicated worker takes up their tools without worrying about their weight or any other difficulty that might arise. They do not wait for each tool to be tested, but use those they deem most appropriate. All the rules contained in the Light on the Path are written for all disciples, but only for those disciples who pursue knowledge. They are of no use or interest to anyone else but the student of this school. To all who are seriously interested in occultism, I say first, take knowledge. To those who have, more will be given. To wait in vain is useless. The womb of time will close before you, and in later days you will remain unborn and powerless. And therefore I say to those hungry or thirsty for knowledge, heed these rules. These rules are not of my making nor my invention. They are simply the formulation of the laws of the supernatural, the expression of truths as absolute in their domain as the laws that govern the behavior of the earth and its atmosphere. The senses referred to in these four statements are the astral or inner senses. No human desires to see the light that illuminates the soul until suffering, pain, or despair have driven them away from the ordinary life of humanity. Pleasure is exhausted first, then pain, until at last the eyes become incapable of tears. This is an evident truth, although I know it will be vehemently denied by many who sympathize with the thoughts emanating from inner life. To see with the astral sense of sight is a form of activity that is difficult for us to comprehend at first. Scientists are aware of the miracle every child performs at birth when they conquer their vision for the first time and put it at the service of their brain. It is an astonishing achievement, although the child does it almost unconsciously, driven by the powerful inheritance of habit. No one consciously remembers ever having done it, just as we cannot recall the individual movements that enabled us to climb a hill a year ago. This is because we live, see, and have our being in matter, and our knowledge of it has become intuitive. With our astral light, the situation is very different. For a long time, humanity has paid it so little attention that it has practically lost the use of its inner senses. It is true that in every civilization there arises a consciousness of the astral, and humanity recognizes, with varying degrees of clarity and confusion, that it knows itself. Yet most often, it denies this, and in turning materialistic, it becomes something strange, a being with eyes, ears, voice, and power, yet one that uses none of these gifts. This is the current state of affairs, and the habit of ignorance has become so ingrained that now no one will perceive with the inner vision until anguish has rendered the physical eyes not only blind but incapable of tears, the very essence of life. The inability to weep signals having faced and transcended simple human nature, reaching a balance unshaken by personal emotions. This does not imply hardness of heart or indifference, nor does it mean exhaustion from suffering, as when the soul seems unable to endure any more pain. Nor does it suggest the apathy of old age, when emotions grow numb from the wearing away of their vibrant chords. None of these conditions is suitable for a disciple, and if any exist within them, they must be overcome before embarking on the path. Hardness of heart belongs to the selfish, the self-centered being, for whom the door is forever closed. Indifference corresponds to the unwise and the false philosopher, whose apathy renders them mere puppets, lacking the strength to face life's realities. When pain or suffering has dulled the sharpness of affliction, the result is lethargy, not unlike the common experience of aging. This condition bars entry to the path, for the first step is arduous and requires someone strong, filled with both psychic and physical energy to attempt it. Let us move quickly. If you enjoy this channel's content and it has helped you, please consider clicking the subscribe button. Doing so will help others find this community and let us know you are one of us. Thank you, and let's return to the audiobook. It is true, as Edgar Allan Poe once said, that the eyes are the windows of the soul, the windows of that enchanted palace where the soul resides. This interpretation most closely aligns with the common language understanding of the text's meaning. If sorrow, consternation, disappointment or pleasure can shake the soul to the point that it loses its firmness in the serene spirit that guides it, and emotions overwhelm the clarity of knowledge with intense sensations, then everything becomes clouded. The windows darken and the light becomes useless. This is as literal as saying that a man standing on the edge of a precipice will surely fall if he loses control due to sudden emotion. The body's balance must be preserved not only in dangerous places, but also on flat ground by taking advantage of the laws of gravity that nature provides. The same applies to the soul, which acts as a bridge between the external body and the divine spirit beyond us. The divine spark resides in stillness, untouched by any disturbances of nature. It is always so. However, the soul can lose control or its knowledge of this stillness, though both are parts of a whole. It is through emotions and sensations that this control is experienced. To feel pleasure or pain causes an intense vibration, which to human consciousness is life itself. This sensitivity does not diminish when the disciple begins their training, but rather increases. It is the first test of their strength. They must suffer, enjoy, or endure more intensely than others because they have taken on a responsibility others do not bear, that of not allowing suffering to deter them from their unwavering purpose. From the very first step, they must hold firm and take control of themselves, for no one else can do it for them. The first 4 aphorisms of the Light on the Path concern astral development. This development must occur to a certain degree, that is, it must fully begin, before the rest of the book becomes truly comprehensible, beyond mere intellectual understanding. Before it can be read as a practical manual rather than just a metaphysical treatise, this step is essential. In one of our great mystical brotherhoods, there are 4 ceremonies held at the beginning of the year that practically illustrate and explain these aphorisms. These ceremonies, attended only by novices, are rituals of the threshold. They demonstrate the seriousness of committing to becoming a disciple, as all are ceremonies of sacrifice. The first is one I have mentioned earlier, the sharpest suffering, the deepest pain, the anguish of loss, and the despair experienced by a trembling soul that has not yet found light in the darkness, leaving it defenseless like the blind. Until these trials can be endured without losing balance, the astral senses must remain sealed. This is a merciful law. The medium or spiritualist who plunges unprepared into the psychic world violates the laws of the supernatural. Those who violate the laws of nature lose their physical health. Those who violate the laws of inner life lose their psychic health. Mediums may go mad, become suicidal, or degenerate into miserable, amoral beings, often ending up as disbelievers, doubting even what their own eyes have seen. The disciple is compelled to become their own master before venturing onto this dangerous path, facing beings who inhabit and work in the astral world, those we call masters because of their vast knowledge and skill in controlling not only themselves, but also the forces around them. The condition of the soul when it lives for the life of sensation, as opposed to knowledge, is more fluctuating than fixed. This is the closest literal representation of the fact. But it is literal only for the mind, not for intuition. For this aspect of human consciousness, a different vocabulary is required. The notion of fixed could perhaps be replaced with the idea of being in its place. In sensation, a permanent home cannot be found because change is the rule in this vibrant existence. This is the first lesson the apprentice must learn. There is no use lingering and lamenting over a scene in a kaleidoscope that has already passed. It is widely known, and W.W.R. Long addressed it in depth, that the first unbearable experience for a neophyte in occultism is profound sadness, a sense of emptiness that makes the world seem desolate and life appear futile. This follows their first serious reflection on the abstract. In contemplating, or even attempting to contemplate, the indescribable mystery of their higher nature, the neophyte themselves invoke the initial test. The oscillation between pleasure and pain ceases, perhaps for an instant, but it is enough to free them from the bonds of the world of sensations. They have briefly experienced the great life and return to daily existence carrying a sense of unreality, emptiness and harrowing negation. This was the nightmare that visited the neophyte Valvlon in Sanoni. Even Sanoni, who had learned great truths and had been entrusted with great powers, had not truly crossed the threshold where fear, hope, despair and joy seem like absolute realities one moment and mere fantasies the next. Life itself often subjects us to this initial test. After all, life is the great teacher. We return to study it after gaining mastery over it, just as a master chemist learns more in the laboratory than their student. There are individuals so close to the door of knowledge that life itself prepares them for it, and no one needs to invoke the terrible guardian of the threshold. Such individuals must naturally be sharp and powerful, capable of experiencing intense pleasure. Then comes pain, fulfilling its great duty. The most intense forms of suffering befall these individuals until they finally awaken from their lethargy of consciousness, and through the strength of their internal vitality, they cross the threshold into a place of peace. At that point, life's vibrations lose their power to tyrannize. The sensitive nature still suffers, but the soul is liberated and guided toward its greatness. Those who are slaves to time and advance slowly through its expanse live a long series of sensations, constantly experiencing a mixture of pleasure and pain. They dare not firmly grasp the serpent of the ego and conquer it to become divine beings. Instead, they prefer to continue moving through diverse experiences, suffering the blows of opposing forces. When one of these time-bound individuals decides to embark on the path of occultism, this becomes their first task, if life has pointed it out to them. If they are not strong enough to teach themselves, and if they possess the power to seek the help of a master, then they undergo this terrifying trial. As described in Sanoni, the oscillation in which they live ceases momentarily, and they must survive the shock of facing what, at first glance, appears to be the abyss of nothingness. Only when they have learned to live in that abyss and found their peace will their eyes lose the ability to cry. Writing comprehensively on these topics is so challenging that I urge anyone who finds interest in this article but still has perplexities or doubts to reach out to me through this magazine's correspondence section. I invite them to write to me because thoughtful questions are just as useful for the general reader as their answers. Before the ear can hear, it must lose its sensitivity. The first 4 rules of Light on the Path are undoubtedly the most important in the book, except for one. They are crucial because they encapsulate the vital law, the very essence of the human astral being. Only in astral or self-illuminated consciousness do the rules that follow hold real meaning. Once one begins to use astral senses, it is natural to start applying these rules. The subsequent rules are merely a guide for their application. When I speak this way, I mean that the first 4 rules are those with relevance and interest for anyone reading them printed on a page. When they are inscribed in the heart and life of an individual, the other rules undoubtedly become not mere metaphysical statements, interesting or extraordinary, but actual realities in their life, to be understood and experienced. These 4 rules are inscribed in the great chamber of every true lodge of a living brotherhood. Whether an individual is about to sell their soul like Faust, be defeated in battle like Hamlet, or enter the precinct, these words are for them. A person can choose virtue or vice, but not until they are truly human. A baby or a savage cannot make such a choice. Similarly, a disciple must first become a disciple before even considering the paths between which to choose. This effort of self-creation as a disciple, the rebirth, must be undertaken alone, without the guidance of a master, until the first 4 rules are understood. No master can help until then. That is why masters are mentioned as they are. No authentic master, whether an adept in power, love, or darkness, can influence an individual until these four rules are adopted. As I mentioned earlier, tears can be considered the moisture of life. The soul must have transcended human emotions and reached a balance that cannot be disturbed by misfortune before its eyes can open to the supernatural world. The voice of the masters is always present in the world, but only those whose ears are no longer receptive to sounds affecting personal life can hear it. Laughter no longer gladdens the heart, nor does anger enrage it. Tender words bring no comfort because the interior to which the ears are like an outer door is a place of unshakable peace that no one can disturb. Just as the eyes are the windows of the soul, the ears are its doors. Through them comes the knowledge of the world's confusion. Those great beings who have conquered life and transcended mere discipleship remain in peace, unperturbed amid humanity's vibration and ever-changing movements. They preserve in themselves a certain knowledge as well as perfect peace, and thus are neither awakened nor disturbed by fragmented or erroneous pieces of information that reach their ears through the shifting voices around them. When I speak of knowledge, I refer to intuitive knowledge. This truth cannot be acquired through hard work or experimentation, as these methods apply only to matter. Matter itself is a constantly changing substance and therefore uncertain. The most absolute and universal laws of natural and physical life, as understood by scientists, will vanish when this universe's life comes to an end. Only their essence will remain in the silence. What value, then, will knowledge of their laws gained through effort and observation hold? I emphasize that I do not intend to disparage acquired knowledge or the work of scientists. On the contrary, I believe that scientists are the precursors of modern thought. The days when literature and art were illuminated by divine inspiration, when poets and sculptors expressed divine light in their grand language, are long gone, along with the ancient sculptors and pre-Homeric poets. Mysteries no longer dominate the world of thought and beauty. Human life, not what transcends it, is now the prevailing force. However, scientists continue to advance, not so much by choice as by necessity, discerning between the interpretable and the uninterpretable. Each new discovery brings them one step closer to that frontier. Thus, I greatly value knowledge obtained through effort and experimentation. However, intuitive knowledge is something entirely distinct. It is not acquired conventionally, but is an inherent faculty of the soul. This does not pertain to the animal soul, which becomes a ghost after death, tethered to the proximity of humans by lust, affection, or remorse for wrongdoing. Rather, it refers to the divine soul that animates all external forms of individual being. This faculty resides intrinsically in the soul, and the aspiring disciple must consciously awaken it through a fierce, resolute, and indomitable effort of will. I use the word indomitable for a specific reason. Only one who is indomitable, who cannot be subdued, and who understands that they must master everything except their own divinity, can awaken this faculty. With faith, all things are possible. Skeptics mock faith and take pride in its absence in their minds. Yet faith is a great engine, an immense power capable of achieving all things, for it represents the alliance or commitment between the divine part of a human being and their lower self. The use of this engine is absolutely necessary to acquire intuitive knowledge, for unless one believes such knowledge resides within, how can it be claimed and utilized? Without this faith, one is more vulnerable than driftwood, or a shipwrecked vessel amid the vast tides of the ocean. These objects are carried back and forth by currents, much like an individual may be affected by the vicissitudes of fortune. However, such external adventures are of little importance. A slave may be dragged in chains through the streets while maintaining the serenity of a philosopher, as Epictetus demonstrated. Conversely, a man may possess all the world's riches and appear to have complete control over his personal destiny, yet lack peace and certainty, being internally agitated by every wave of thought that touches him. These fluctuations not only toss the individual like driftwood on water, something trivial, but also penetrate the soul's gates, flooding it and leaving it blind and void of enduring intelligence. Thus, fleeting impressions exert a powerful influence on it. To better illustrate this point, let us consider an example. Imagine a writer at work, a painter engaged with their canvas, or a composer listening to melodies emerging from their imagination. Suppose any of these artists spends their daily hours by a wide window overlooking a bustling street. The constant flow of life scarcely affects their vision or hearing, as they are absorbed in their creative work. In contrast, A man with an empty mind whose day lacks purpose sits at the same window, observing passers-by and remembering faces he finds pleasant or interesting by chance. Similarly, the mind, in its relationship with eternal truth, must cease transmitting partial fluctuations and unreliable data to the soul. In that internal place of peace which already exists, when the first rule is understood, the light of genuine knowledge begins to shine. Then the ears begin to hear, though faintly and delicately at first. Indeed, these initial signs of truly real life are so fragile that they are sometimes dismissed as mere fantasies or imaginings. Yet, before these experiences become more than imaginings, one must face the abyss of emptiness in a completely different manner. Absolute silence, achieved only by closing the ears to all ephemeral sounds, presents itself as an even more terrifying horror than the formless darkness of space. Our only mental conception of blank space, in its barest form, is one of absolute darkness. This can be a profound source of physical fear for most people, and when considered as an internal, immutable reality, it may evoke a sense of annihilation more than anything else. Yet this annihilation is of a particular kind. Even in the deepest darkness, a sound, a voice, can bring comfort. After finding their way through this blackness, which is the dreadful abyss, the disciple must then close the gates of their soul in such a manner that neither comfort nor enemy may enter. In making this second effort, those who could not previously perceive it realize that pain and pleasure are merely sensations. When one reaches the solitude of silence, the soul feels an intense and passionate hunger for any sensation to rest upon. Painful sensations would be as welcome as pleasant ones. Upon reaching this awareness, the brave individual may, by grasping and holding it, destroy sensitivity altogether. When the ear no longer distinguishes between the pleasant and the painful, it ceases to be affected by others' voices. Only then is it safe and possible to open the gates of the soul. The first step, vision, is the easiest, as it is partly achieved through intellectual effort. The intellect can govern the heart, as is known in everyday life. Thus, this preliminary step still belongs to the realm of matter. However, the second step allows for no such assistance or material aid. When one compels their ears to hear only eternal silence, the being we call human becomes something no longer human. A superficial analysis of the myriad influences others exert upon us reveals this must be so. The disciple will continue fulfilling all their adult life's responsibilities, but will do so according to their own sense of right and duty, not the opinions of any individual or group. This outcome is a clear consequence of following the creed of knowledge rather than blind beliefs. To achieve the pure silence necessary for the disciple, the heart and emotions must be set aside, as must the intellect and its reasoning. Both are mere mechanisms that will fade with time from human existence. This is the moment when the essence beyond, the driving force sustaining life, must awaken and act. It is the most dangerous moment. In the first trial, individuals may lose their sanity out of fear, as Valdlon wrote. No novelist has reached the second trial, though some poets have. The subtlety and danger of this stage lie in an individual's ability to overcome or confront it, depending on their inner strength. If they have the power to awaken this extraordinary part of themselves, the supreme essence, then they have the power to open the golden gates and become the true alchemist, in possession of the elixir of life. At this point of experience, the occultist diverges from all other men and enters a life uniquely their own, following the path of individual realization rather than mere obedience to the powers governing our world. This ascent toward individual power indeed links them to the noblest forces of life, making them one with those forces as they transcend earthly influences and this universe's laws. Here lies humanity's sole hope of success in this great endeavor, to leap directly from its current state to the next and immediately become an intrinsic part of divine power, just as it has been an intrinsic part of the intellectual power of the great nature to which it belongs. Humanity is always advancing toward a higher state, if such a contradiction can be understood. Those who hold this position, believing in their innate power to progress and in that of all humanity, are the pioneers, the elder brothers. Each individual must make this great leap unaided, but it is comforting to know that others have trodden this path before. It is possible that some may have been lost in the abyss. However, What is important is that they had the courage to venture into it. Why do I say that some may have been lost in the abyss? It is due to this fact. One who has undergone this process becomes unrecognizable until both reach a completely new state. There is no need to delve into the details of what that state is. I will only say that in the initial stage, as the individual enters silence, they lose awareness of their friends, lovers, and all those who are close and dear to them. They also lose sight of their teachers and those who have preceded them on the path. I explain this because it is common for those going through this stage to do so without bitter complaints. If the mind understood beforehand that the silence must be complete, such complaints would surely not arise as an obstacle on the path. Your teacher or predecessor may have guided you and offered all the sympathy that the human heart can provide. But when silence and darkness arrive, you lose all knowledge of them. You are alone and they cannot help you, not because their power has vanished, but because you have invoked your greatest enemy. When I speak of the great enemy, I refer to oneself. If one has the strength to confront their own soul in the darkness and silence, they will have overcome the physical or animal self, which is governed solely by sensations. This statement, though it may seem complex, is actually quite simple. The human being, when they reach their fullness and civilization is at its zenith, finds themselves in a dilemma. If they could claim their great inheritance, they would easily free themselves from the burden of mere animal life. However, this does not happen, and so human races flourish, decline, and eventually disappear from the face of the earth, no matter how splendid their flourishing may have been. The responsibility lies with the individual to make this great effort, to resist being terrified by their higher nature, to refuse to be pulled back by their lower or more material self. Every individual who achieves this becomes a great redeemer of humanity. They may not proclaim their achievements, they may live in secrecy and silence, but it is a fact that establishes a bond between them and their divine part, between the known and the unknown, between the clamor of the world and the serenity of the high Himalayan peaks. They do not need to be physically present among men to forge this bond. On the astral plane, they are that bond, and this fact makes them a being of a nature distinct from the rest of humanity. Even in the early stages of the path to knowledge, when they have barely taken the second step, they find a more solid balance and realize they are a recognized part of a whole. These contradictions of life constantly present themselves, providing material for literary creation. The occultist experiences them more intensely as they advance on their path. As they become more introspective and autonomous, they find themselves increasingly connected to a deeper and more defined flow of thoughts and feelings. When they have overcome the first lesson and conquered the hunger for affection and dependence on others, they become more capable of inspiring love. As they detach from life, it comes to them in a completely new way, with renewed meaning. For the human being, the world has always been a place full of contradictions, but when they become a disciple, they discover that life can be described as a series of paradoxes. This is a natural fact, and the reason is understandable. The soul of man resides like a distant star, even in the case of the vilest individual among us, while their consciousness is subject to the law of sensory and vibrant life. This alone is enough to give rise to the complexities of character that provide material for literary creation. Every human being is an enigma to their friends, enemies, and even themselves. Their motivations are often inscrutable, and they cannot comprehend why they act in certain ways. The disciple's effort lies in awakening consciousness in that part of themselves where their power and divinity reside. As this consciousness awakens, the contradictions in the human being become more evident than ever, as do the paradoxes they experience. For of course the human being creates their own life, and the wise proverb says that adventures are for adventurers. It stems from real facts that encompass the entire spectrum of human experience. The pressure on the divine part of the silent soul, when awakened, influences the ordinary life of man positively, making it more determined, vital, real, and responsible. Returning to the two cases mentioned earlier, the occultist has retreated to their inner citadel and found their fortress. Immediately, they become aware of the demands of life that fall upon them. They do not gain their strength by their own right, but because they are a part of the whole. As soon as they find themselves safe from the turmoil of life and can remain steadfast, the outer world calls them to work within it. The same happens with the heart. When it no longer desires to take, it is called to give abundantly. Light on the Path has been described as a book of paradoxes, as it reflects the true personal experience of the disciple. Acquiring the astral senses of sight and hearing, that is, attaining perception and opening the doors of the soul, are enormous tasks that may require the sacrifice of many successive incarnations. However, when the will has reached its full strength, the entire miracle can be accomplished in an instant. At that moment, the disciple ceases to be a servant of time. These first two steps are negative in the sense that they involve withdrawing from a current condition of things rather than advancing toward another. The next two are positive and represent an advance toward a new state of things. The neophytes demand, before the voice can speak in the presence of the masters, the language must be acquired, refers to the power of communication. The moment one begins, their active life is marked by its acquisition. Now, before continuing, allow me to explain a bit about the arrangement of the rules written in Light on the Path. The first 7 numbered rules are subdivisions of the first 2 unnumbered rules discussed in the 2 previous articles. The numbered rules were simply my attempt to make the unnumbered ones more comprehensible. Rules 8 through 15 of these numbered rules pertain to this unnumbered rule, which is now my text. As I mentioned, these rules are written for all disciples but for no one else. They are of no interest to anyone else, so I trust no one else will bother to continue reading these documents. The first 2 rules, which encompass the entire effort that requires the use of the scalpel, I will expand upon if asked. However, the disciple is expected to deal with the serpent, their lower self, unaided to master their passions and human emotions with the force of their own will. They may only ask a master for help once they have achieved this, or at least partially achieved it. Otherwise, the doors and windows of their soul are clouded, obstructed and darkened, and no knowledge can reach them. I do not intend in these documents to tell anyone how to deal with their own soul. I am simply providing the disciple with knowledge. That I am even writing this now for all who may come to read it is due to the fact that the supernatural, by its own immutable laws, requires it. The 4 rules I have written for Westerners who wish to study them are, as I mentioned, written in the antechamber of any living fraternity. I may add more, whether in the antechamber of a living or extinct fraternity or any order yet to be formed. When I speak of a fraternity or an order, I'm not referring to an arbitrary structure created by scholars and intellectualists. I mean a real fact in the supernatural, a process of development toward God or the absolute good. During this developmental process, the disciple encounters harmony, pure knowledge, and pure truth in varying degrees. As they advance through these degrees, they become part of what could be approximately described as a layer of human consciousness. Here, they find individuals like themselves, people of a selfless nature. Their union with these individuals becomes permanent and inseparable because it is based on an essential similarity of nature. They are bound together by vows that need not be expressed in ordinary words. This is what I understand by brotherhood. If the first rules are mastered, the disciple stands at the threshold. Then, if their will is sufficiently firm, the power of speech comes, a dual power. This is because, as they progress, they enter a state of expansion where each unfolding bud emits its multiple rays or petals. If they are to exercise their new gift, they must employ it in both aspects. They discover within themselves the ability to speak in the presence of the masters. In other words, they gain the right to seek contact with the most divine part of that state of consciousness they have entered. However, due to the nature of their position, they are compelled to act in 2 ways simultaneously. They cannot raise their voice to the heights where the gods dwell until they have penetrated the depths where their light does not yet shine. They are subject to an inflexible law. If they aspire to become a neophyte, they immediately become a servant. Nonetheless, their service is sublime, even if only because of the quality of those with whom they share it. For the masters are also servants, and they claim their reward later. Part of their service lies in allowing their knowledge to reach the disciple. The disciple's first act of service is to share some of that knowledge with those who are not yet ready to be where they are. This is not an arbitrary decision made by any master, instructor, or divine being, no matter how exalted. It is a law of the life into which the disciple has entered. That is why it was inscribed on the inner doorways of the temples of the ancient Egyptian brotherhood. The worker is worthy of his wages. Ask, and it shall be given to you. This may sound too simple and easy to believe in the mystical sense in which the word is used in this writing. However, the disciple cannot ask, in the mystical sense of the word, until they have acquired the power to help others. Why is this a categorical statement? Is it too absolute to say that a man must have a foothold before he can leap? The position is the same. If you give help, if you perform work, then there is a rightful claim, not in the sense of personal entitlement, but in the sense of shared nature. The divine beings give and demand that you also give before you can be considered part of their lineage. This law becomes evident when the disciple strives to speak. Speech is a gift that only comes to the disciple of power and knowledge. The spiritualist may enter the astral psychic world, but they do not find true language there unless they claim it immediately and continue to do so. If they are interested only in phenomena or the mere circumstances and events of astral life, they do not enter any direct path of thought or purpose. They simply exist and enjoy astral life as they did physical life. Of course, there are some simple lessons that the astral psychic can teach, just as there are simple lessons that material and intellectual life teach, and these lessons must be learned. The individual who seeks to enter the disciple's life without having learned the first and simple lessons will always suffer for their ignorance. These are essential and must be deeply studied, experienced repeatedly, so that every part of their nature is permeated by them. Returning to the claim of the power of speech, as it is called, the neophyte invokes the Great One who occupies a prominent place on the ray of knowledge into which they have entered for guidance. When they do this, their voice is projected backward by the power they have approached and resonates in the deepest corners of human ignorance. In a vague and confused way, news of the existence of knowledge and a beneficent power that teaches reaches those who are willing to listen. No disciple can cross the threshold without communicating this news and leaving some record of it. They may feel horror at the imperfect and unprepared way they have done so, and then arises the desire to do it properly. And with the desire to help others comes power, because this desire arises from purity. It seeks no credit, fame, or personal rewards in fulfilling it. This is why the disciple gains the power to accomplish it. The history of all the past, as far as we can trace it, clearly shows that no credit, fame, or reward is gained from this first task entrusted to the neophyte. Mystics have always been scorned and seers have been disbelieved. Those who have had the added advantage of intellect have left their written records for posterity, which for most people seem meaningless and visionary, even when the authors speak from a distant past. The disciple who undertakes the task, expecting in secret fame or success to become a master and apostle before the world fails, before they even attempt their task. Their hidden hypocrisy corrupts their own soul and the souls of those they secretly touch. Inwardly they worship themselves, and this idolatry brings its own reward. The disciple who possesses the power of entry and is strong enough to overcome each barrier, when the divine message reaches their spirit, completely forgets themselves in the new consciousness that embraces them. If this higher contact truly awakens them, they become one with the divine in their desire to give rather than receive, in their desire to help rather than be helped, in their determination to feed the hungry rather than take for themselves the manna of heaven. Their nature transforms, and the selfishness that drives the actions of human beings in daily life suddenly leaves them. The reclusiveness of the adept. Before the voice can speak in the presence of the masters, it must have lost the power to wound. Those who pay superficial and passing attention to the subject of occultism, which are many, constantly wonder why, if adepts exist in life, they do not manifest themselves in the world and show their power. The fact that the primary residence of these sages lies beyond the confines of the Himalayas seems sufficient evidence to many that they are nothing but fictional figures. Otherwise, why would they be located in such a distant place? Unfortunately, it has been nature, not personal choice or decision, that has determined this. There are certain places on Earth where the influence of civilization is barely felt, and the fever of the modern age has no impact. In these special places, there is always time and opportunity for the truths of life to remain undisturbed by the actions of an emerging society obsessed with money and the pursuit of pleasure. As long as there are adepts on Earth, there must be places of retreat for them. This is a fact of nature, which is nothing more than an outward manifestation of a deep truth in the supernatural. The neophyte's petition is not heard until the voice in which it is expressed has lost the power to harm. This is because divine astral life is a place where order prevails, just as it does in natural life. Of course, there is always a center and a periphery as in nature. Near the central heart of life on any plane, knowledge exists, and there, order reigns completely, while chaos tinges the outer margin of the circle. In truth, life in all its forms bears some resemblance to a philosophical school. There are always those devoted to knowledge who sacrifice their own lives in its pursuit, and there is always a frivolous crowd that comes and goes. Epictetus once said that teaching philosophy to such individuals was as easy as eating custard with a fork. The same holds true in the higher life. The adept retreats to an even deeper, safer place of residence, so secure and protected that no discordant sound can reach their ears. Why must it be this way, one might ask? If such beings possess the great powers that believers in their existence claim, why do they not manifest themselves in the world and demonstrate these abilities? The answer is seemingly evident. They serve humanity and are identified with the entire world, ready to sacrifice themselves vicariously for it at any time, not by dying, but by living for it. Why not die for it? Because they are part of the great whole and one of its most valuable components. Their life does not belong to them, but is destined to serve the forces that work behind them. They are the flower of humanity, the blossom that contains the divine seed within itself, safeguarding a treasure of universal nature. This treasure is preserved and protected to allow fruition at specific moments in the history of the world. Only at such times are they permitted to mingle with humanity as its redeemer. However, for those who have the power to adapt to this multitude, they are always near. For those strong enough to overcome the vices of individual human nature, as laid out in the Four Rules, the adept is consciously present, easily recognizable, and ready to respond. This conquest of the self involves renouncing qualities that most people consider not only unshakable, but desirable. The power to harm encompasses many things humans value, not only in themselves, but in others as well. It includes the instinct for self-defense and self-preservation, the notion that one possesses certain rights, whether as a citizen, a human being, or an individual, and the pleasant sensation of self-love and virtue. These are difficult assertions for many, but they are true. The words I write now, and those I have written on this subject, are by no means my own. They have been drawn from the traditions of the Lodge of the Great Brotherhood, which in its time was the secret splendor of Egypt. The rules inscribed in its antechamber are the same as those found in the antechambers of current lodges. Throughout history, sages have lived apart from the crowds. Even when some temporary reason or purpose brings one of them into the world of men, their retreat and safety remain intact. It is part of their inheritance, part of their position. They have a royal title to it and cannot relinquish it any more than the Duke of Westminster can decide not to be the Duke of Westminster. In various great cities around the world, an adept may occasionally reside for a time, simply passing through. Yet all of them are occasionally aided by the power and real presence of one of these men. Here in London, just as in Paris and St. Petersburg, there are individuals of great development, but only those who have conquered the self and possess the power to recognize them know them as mystics. Otherwise, how could they survive even briefly in a mental and psychic environment created by the chaos and agitation of a city? Without being protected and secure, their own growth would be disrupted, and their work would be hindered. A neophyte might encounter an adept in the flesh, might live under the same roof as them, and yet be incapable of recognizing them or making their own voice heard. This is because no physical proximity, no close personal relationship, no degree of daily intimacy can override the inexorable laws that ensure the adept's seclusion. No voice reaches their inner ears until it has become a divine voice, one that does not echo the clamors of the ego. Any lesser call would be as ineffective and wasteful as teaching a mere child learning the alphabet through a scholar of philology. Until an individual becomes in heart and spirit a disciple, they do not exist for those who are masters of disciples. One becomes a disciple through only one method, renouncing their personal humanity. For the voice to lose its ability to cause harm, the individual must reach the point where they see themselves as part of the immense multitude of living beings, one of the grains of sand swept to and fro by the sea of vibrant existence. It is said that every grain of sand in the ocean bed is, at some point, brought to the shore and exposed to the sun. Similarly, human beings are driven by a great force, and each, in turn, experiences the rays of the sun upon them. When a person can regard their life as part of a whole in this way, they will no longer struggle to gain anything exclusively for themselves. This implies renouncing personal rights. The ordinary person expects not only to have good fortune like everyone else, but also in certain aspects of interest to them to fare better than others. The disciple has no such expectation. Thus, even if placed in a position like that of a chained slave, they would not complain. They understand that the wheel of life constantly turns, as illustrated by Burne-Jones in his magnificent painting, The Wheel of Fortune. The wheel turns, carrying both the rich and the poor, the powerful and the weak. Each has their moment of good fortune as the wheel lifts them to the top. The king ascends and descends. The poet is celebrated and then forgotten. The slave finds happiness and is then discarded. All in turn are crushed as the wheel continues to spin. The disciple understands this, and while it is their duty to make the most of the life they have, they do not lament or rejoice in their own lot or that of others. All without exception are here only to learn a lesson, and the disciple smiles at the efforts of socialists and reformers who attempt to reorganize circumstances that are the result of the inherent forces of human nature. To them, such efforts are futile and a waste of life and energy. When an individual realizes this, they relinquish their supposed individual rights, regardless of their nature. This removes the sharp thorn that afflicts all common people. Once the disciple has fully recognized that the idea of individual rights is simply the product of the poisonous quality within, the hissing of the serpent of ego that poisons their own life and the lives of those around them, they are ready to participate in an annual ceremony open to all prepared neophytes. In this ceremony, they cast aside all weapons of defense and attack, all the arms of the mind, heart, brain, and spirit. Never again can they consider another individual as someone they can criticize or condemn. Never again can they raise their voice in self-defense or self-justification. From that ceremony, they return to the world as defenseless and unprotected as a newborn. Indeed, that is what they are. They have begun a new birth on a higher plane of life, a windswept, well-lit plateau from which their eyes see with greater intelligence and perceive the world anew. I have previously mentioned that after renouncing the sense of individual rights, the disciple must also renounce the sense of self-love and virtue. This may seem like a terrible teaching, but all occultists understand it is not a teaching. It is a fact. Those who consider themselves more virtuous than others, who feel pride in their virtue, or who believe they are superior in some way to their fellow beings, cannot become disciples. The individual must become as a small child before they can enter the kingdom of heaven. Virtue and wisdom are sublime qualities, but if they generate pride and a sense of separation from the rest of humanity in the mind of a person, they then become the most subtle manifestations of the serpent of the ego. At any moment, this serpent can take a coarser form and strike fiercely, as when it drives the actions of a murderer motivated by greed or hatred, or of a politician who sacrifices the masses for their own benefit, or that of their party. In fact, losing the power to harm means that the serpent has not only been driven away, but has been completely destroyed. If the disciple uses their knowledge and power for selfish purposes, they become a student of the dark arts, for the path to them is wide and easy, and one can find it even with their eyes blindfolded. It is evident that this is the path to destruction, because when a person begins to live exclusively for themselves, their world gradually shrinks until they are finally trapped in a space as narrow as the head of a pin. We have all witnessed this phenomenon in daily life. An isolated person becomes less attractive and pleasant to others, a dreadful sight, and people avoid someone so selfish as if they were a predatory beast. How much more terrible it is when this happens on a higher plane of life, with the added power of knowledge, through multiple successive incarnations. Therefore, I say stop and reflect deeply on the threshold. For if the neophyte demands without complete purification, they will not enter the retreat of the divine adept, but will summon the terrible forces that reside on the dark side of our human nature. Before the soul can be in the presence of the masters, its feet must be washed in the blood of the heart. The word soul, as used here, refers to the divine soul or the shattered spirit. To have confidence means that the disciple trusts in themselves. They have surrendered their emotions, their very being, even their humanity. They cannot fear or be in pain. Their entire consciousness is centered on divine life, which is symbolized by the masters. They have no eyes, ears, voice, or power except in and for the divine ray they have touched with their highest sense. Then they have no fear. They are free from suffering, anxiety, or dismay. Their soul stands tall without shrinking or desiring delay, in the full radiance of the divine light that completely passes through them. Then they have entered into their inheritance and can claim their kinship with the masters of humanity. They stand upright, lift their head, and breathe the same air as they do. But before this is possible, the soul must purify itself in the blood of the heart. The sacrifice or surrender of the heart and emotions is the first of the rules. It means achieving balance that cannot be shaken by personal emotion. This is what the Stoic philosopher does. He also stands apart and observes with equanimity his own sufferings, as well as those of others. Just as tears, in the language of occultists, express the soul of emotion, not its material appearance, blood expresses not the blood that is essential for physical life, but the vital, creative principle in the nature of man that drives human life to experience pain and pleasure, joy and sorrow. When the blood has flowed from the heart, the person presents themselves before the masters as a pure spirit that no longer desires to incarnate through emotion and experience. Through great cycles of time, successive incarnations in gross matter may still be their destiny, but they no longer desire them. The raw desire to live has parted from them. When they take human form, they do so with a divine purpose, to fulfill the work of the masters and not for any other end. They do not seek pleasure or pain, do not long for heaven, nor fear hell. However, they have entered into a great inheritance, which is not so much a compensation for the things they have renounced, but a state that simply erases the memory of them. Now, they do not live in the world, but with it. Their horizon has expanded to encompass the entire universe. Regarding the work of the Yogi Society, the Yogi Publishing Society has future plans, including the publication of a series of valuable works on Hindu yogi philosophy in all its aspects, from the physical to the mental, psychic, and spiritual planes of manifestation. Yogi Ramarak, a student and writer recognized for the depth of his thought, clarity of mind, profound spiritual knowledge, and clear, simple style, will be the author of this series. The Hindu Yogi Science of Breathing will be the first in the series, and the others will be published as soon as possible. The series will cover the entire scope of Eastern occultism and will be written in a simple and practical style. The deepest truths will be expressed in simple and understandable English, so that younger students can easily comprehend them. We will largely avoid the use of Sanskrit words and terms, as we believe English is rich enough to express the most useful forms of metaphysical or scientific thought. We consider that the frequent use of unfamiliar Sanskrit words has hindered the study of Eastern occultism until now. We will focus on presenting facts rather than theories. Each book will provide complete instructions, examples, exercises, and detailed guidance. These books will be different from any other written on these topics and will be authorized and convincing. We will not merely inform the student about what can be done, but we will teach them how to do it. In addition, the Society will reprint a series of classic occult works written by Eastern authors and others, which have been out of reach for the public due to their high cost and limited editions. These works will be printed in large quantities and sold at a symbolic price, so that everyone will have the opportunity to read them. Descriptive circulars can be requested for free from the Yogi Publishing Society, Palmyra, New Jersey.